In the shadowed streets of Cali, Colombia, two brothers quietly built an empire that rivaled the might of Pablo Escobar himself. Gilberto and Miguel Rodriguez Orejuela, masters of deception, strategy, and control, turned the Cali cartel into a global cocaine powerhouse, hidden behind respectability, wealth, and a web of corruption that reached every corner of power. Under the sweltering sun of 1940s Cali, Colombia, two brothers, Gilberto and Miguel Rodriguez Orejuela, were born into modest beginnings. Their childhood was far from the world of luxury and power they would later command. Gilberto, the elder, was intelligent, calm, and strategic, while Miguel possessed a sharper, more cautious mind. Together, they grew up witnessing a nation marked by political unrest and deep inequality, a country where opportunity often belonged to those willing to take it by any means. As young men, the brothers displayed an entrepreneurial instinct that went far beyond ordinary ambition. Gilberto first entered the world of legitimate business through ventures in pharmacies and import operations, where he learned the intricate movement of goods and money across borders. These early experiences would later become the foundation for one of the most sophisticated drug trafficking empires in history. By the late 1960s, Colombia was beginning to transform. Marijuana exports to the United States were on the rise, and criminal organizations were realizing the enormous profits waiting in the illegal trade. The Orejuela brothers saw opportunity not in chaos, but in structure. They began by smuggling small shipments of contraband goods, building networks with customs officials and local businessmen. Their operations were efficient and discreet, reflecting Gilberto's methodical nature. Where others relied on violence and intimidation, the Orejuelas relied on calculation, negotiation, and the manipulation of systems. It was not long before their quiet efficiency drew attention from figures in the growing drug underworld. As the 1970s unfolded, a new era of narcotics was emerging. Cocaine, once a niche product, became the drug of choice in the United States. The demand was exploding, and Colombia was perfectly positioned to meet it, while Pablo Escobar's Medellín cartel was rising with ruthless force. The Orejuela brothers were laying the groundwork for a different kind of empire, one that operated in silence, behind layers of legitimacy. They joined forces with other Cali-based traffickers, including Jose Santa Cruz Londoño and H.A. Lulma, Pacho, Herrera, forming what would become known as the Cali Cartel. Unlike Medellín's approach of open war, the Cali Cartel's philosophy was businesslike, almost corporate. They sought to infiltrate institutions rather than destroy them. Under Gilberto's leadership, the organization built a structure unlike anything seen before in the drug trade. Every division had a specific role: transportation, distribution, security, and finance. Records were meticulously kept, and decisions were made with precision. They employed accountants, lawyers, and legitimate businessmen, blurring the line between crime and commerce. Cocaine was moved from the jungles of Peru and Bolivia into Colombia, processed in laboratories hidden in the countryside, and then exported through elaborate routes, using commercial shipments, concealed cargo, and even the bodies of unsuspecting couriers. The scale of their operations was staggering. By the early 1980s, the Cali cartel was responsible for an estimated 80% of the world's cocaine supply. What made the Orejuela brothers truly dangerous was not their capacity for violence, but their mastery of concealment. They bought banks, invested in real estate, and controlled legitimate corporations across Colombia. Through front companies, they laundered billions of dollars, reinvesting their profits into the nation's economy. To the public, Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela became known as Il Ajedrecista, the chess player, a name earned for his ability to outthink law enforcement and rivals alike. He and Miguel cultivated an image of respectability. They sponsored soccer clubs, including the famous América de Cali, and mingled with politicians, judges, and police commanders. They presented themselves as successful businessmen contributing to Colombia's development, while behind closed doors, their influence reached deep into government and law enforcement. Their empire grew quietly, methodically, without the chaos that defined Medellín. But beneath the surface of calm, competition and distrust simmered between the two cartels. The Medellín cartel, led by Escobar, thrived on fear and bloodshed. The Cali cartel, in contrast, saw itself as disciplined and superior, a network of intelligence rather than intimidation. Yet the rivalry between them was inevitable. When Escobar declared war on the Colombian state in the mid-1980s, bombing buildings and assassinating officials, the Orejuela brothers saw opportunity. They presented themselves as allies of the government, quietly feeding intelligence to authorities and the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. Their cooperation was not born of morality but of strategy. With Medellín drawing all the heat, Cali expanded its influence, filling the void left by Escobar's violent campaigns. As the Colombian state and the United States focused their full attention on destroying Medellín, Cali's operations flourished. New smuggling corridors opened across Panama, Venezuela, and the Caribbean. The cartel developed advanced communication systems, including encrypted phones and satellite links, to coordinate international shipments. Their network extended deep into the United States, particularly in Miami, New York, and Los Angeles, where trusted operatives managed distribution. Unlike the chaotic street-level operations of Medellín, Cali's system functioned like a corporation with hierarchy, order, and accountability. Every shipment was tracked, every transaction documented. Losses were minimal, profits astronomical. By the early 1990s, after Escobar's death, the Orejuela brothers stood at the summit of power. The Cali cartel was now the dominant force in the global cocaine trade. Their wealth was immeasurable, their reach unparalleled. Yet their strength rested not in violence, but in invisibility. The brothers had built a system so integrated into Colombia's institutions that it seemed untouchable. They financed political campaigns, including the 1994 presidential election of Ernesto Samper. Later investigations revealed that millions of cartel dollars had flowed into his campaign coffers, a revelation that shook the nation and the world. For the first time, the facade of legitimacy surrounding the Orejuela brothers began to crack. The investigation into the Samper campaign scandal brought unwanted attention to Cali. International pressure mounted, and both Colombian and American authorities turned their gaze toward the cartel that had long operated in the shadows. The brothers realized that the age of quiet control was ending. They began moving assets, shutting down operations, and tightening security. But their empire was vast, and secrecy was never absolute. U.S. and Colombian and intelligence agencies launched a coordinated offensive. Task forces, equipped with new technology and local informants, began mapping out the cartel's structure. Inside Cali, paranoia grew. The same systems of control that had once kept the cartel stable now became a burden. Phones were monitored, couriers intercepted, and trusted allies began to disappear. The brothers knew that betrayal was inevitable. The walls were closing in. Gilberto, ever the strategist, believed he could outmaneuver the storm. Miguel, cautious and calculating, began to plan for escape, but the world they had built was too large to move unnoticed. In 1995, Colombian police, acting on intelligence from the DEA, launched a massive operation to dismantle the Cali cartel. Dozens of raids took place across the city, targeting safe houses, laboratories, and offices. Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela was captured first, in an apartment complex hidden behind a false wall. The arrest shocked Colombia. For years, Gilberto had seemed untouchable, a man whose influence reached the highest levels of society. His capture signaled that the invisible empire of Cali was beginning to collapse. Miguel, however, remained at large. For months, he evaded capture, moving through a network of safe houses while continuing to direct operations. The remnants of the cartel fought to maintain control, but without Gilberto's leadership, cracks widened. Law enforcement tightened its grip, and one by one, key figures were arrested. In August 1995, Miguel Rodriguez Orejuela was finally captured in a dramatic raid. Hidden behind a specially constructed false wall in his home, he was discovered by police after weeks of surveillance. With both brothers in custody, the once mighty Cali cartel began to unravel. Even in prison, the Orejuela brothers maintained influence. They continued to control financial networks and direct operations through intermediaries, though on a much smaller scale. Their power, however, was no longer absolute. International cooperation between Colombia and the United States led to a systematic dismantling of the cartel's remaining infrastructure. Properties were seized, accounts frozen, and loyalists turned informants. The brothers' empire, built on discipline and discretion, had fallen to the same fate as every great criminal dynasty: betrayal, exposure, and time. The story of Gilberto and Miguel Rodriguez Orejuela is not one of explosive violence or cinematic battles. It is a tale of calculation, intelligence, and ambition woven into the fabric of Colombia's history. While Escobar's Medellín cartel had captured the world's attention with blood and chaos, the Orejuela brothers mastered the art of control through silence. Their legacy reshaped organized crime, proving that the most dangerous power is not always loud. It is often hidden, patient, and precise. In the aftermath of Miguel Rodriguez Orejuela's capture, the once invincible Cali cartel entered a period of irreversible decline. The Colombian government, under intense pressure from the United States, intensified its crackdown on the remnants of the organization. The arrests of the Orejuela brothers had sent shockwaves through every level of Colombia's underworld, and panic spread among those who had depended on the cartel's protection. Without the brothers' disciplined leadership, the structure that had kept Cali's vast operations stable began to collapse. Communications broke down. Rival factions within the organization turned on one another, and law enforcement units moved swiftly to seize the assets that had once been untouchable. Inside prison, Gilberto and Miguel attempted to maintain control through coded messages and loyal intermediaries. They trusted a few long-standing associates to keep operations running and manage the enormous fortune they had accumulated over decades. Among their allies were remnants of the old Cali hierarchy, men like Jose Santa Cruz Londoño, who had evaded capture for a time, and H. Aylmer, Pacho, Herrera, whose loyalty to the organization was unwavering. But without the full force of the brothers' strategic coordination, every decision became riskier. Colombian and American agents were intercepting communications and following money trails that had once seemed invisible. In 1996, Jose Santa Cruz Londoño was captured by police in Bogotá. Unlike the calm and composed Gilberto, Santa Cruz refused to accept imprisonment as the end. Within months of his arrest, he escaped from La Picota prison an audacious act that stunned the authorities. His freedom, however, was short-lived. In March 1996, while hiding in Medellín, he was tracked down and killed in a police operation. His death marked the end of the last major Cali leader still at large. That same year, Pacho Herrera surrendered voluntarily, perhaps realizing that the era of the Cali cartel had come to a definitive close. He was imprisoned, but even there, the reach of old rivalries proved deadly. In 1998, during a routine football match inside the Palmyra prison, Herrera was shot and killed by another inmate, reportedly connected to a personal vendetta. By the late 1990s, the Cali cartel's empire had been largely dismantled. Thousands of its associates were arrested, and hundreds of millions of dollars in assets were seized. The Colombian government hailed the operation as a historic victory. Yet despite these triumphs, the cocaine trade did not end. It merely adapted. Smaller organizations emerged to fill the vacuum left by Cali's fall, many of them formed by the cartel's former lieutenants. The Orejuela brothers watched from behind bars as the industry they had once controlled splintered into fragments. During this time, U.S. prosecutors intensified their efforts to bring both brothers to American soil. Evidence gathered from years of investigation showed that the Cali cartel had flooded the United States with billions of dollars worth of cocaine, making the extradition of its leaders a top priority. However, the Orejuelas had powerful connections and deep influence within Colombia. Their lawyers fought fiercely to prevent extradition, arguing that they had already been convicted and were serving sentences in Colombia. Behind the legal battles lay a complex web of politics and diplomacy. Many in Colombia feared that extraditing the brothers would expose further details about their connections to prominent politicians, businessmen, and even elements within law enforcement. In the early 2000s, while imprisoned in Colombia, the brothers continued to exercise a quiet but significant influence. Reports surfaced that they had arranged reduced sentences through cooperation with authorities and the payment of large sums of money. Despite being confined, their operations had not completely disappeared. DEA agents traced money laundering schemes that still bore the hallmarks of Cali's meticulous organization. U.S. authorities continued to press for extradition, insisting that true justice could only be served on American soil, where the brothers would face charges for trafficking thousands of kilograms of cocaine into the country. The turning point came in 2004. After years of negotiation and mounting international pressure, the Colombian government approved the extradition of Gilberto and Miguel Rodríguez Orejuela to the United States. The move was part of a broader shift in Colombia's policy, signaling a new era of cooperation with U.S. law enforcement. The brothers were flown to Miami under heavy security, ending decades of speculation and evasion. In the United States, they faced a series of indictments that painted a detailed picture of their empire's vast reach, from the coca fields of South America to the distribution networks in American cities. The trial process revealed the depth of the brothers' influence and the sophistication of their methods. Witnesses testified about complex money, laundering operations that moved cash through banks, shell companies, and offshore accounts. The cartel had built a financial infrastructure so intricate that it had taken years for investigators to untangle it. U.S. prosecutors presented evidence that the Cali cartel had been responsible for shipping over 200 tons of cocaine into the United States during its peak. The brothers, faced with overwhelming evidence, chose to cooperate. In 2006, both Gilberto and Miguel pleaded guilty to charges of conspiring to import cocaine and launder money. They were each sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. Their extradition marked not only the end of the Cali cartel, but also the conclusion of an era in the Colombian drug trade. Yet even as they sat behind bars, their names carried weight in the world of organized crime. In interviews and reports, law enforcement officials described the Orejuela brothers as architects of a criminal model that combined business discipline with global reach. Unlike the Medellín cartel, which had ruled through terror, the Cali cartel had demonstrated how corruption, intelligence, and structure could build an empire just as powerful and far more enduring. Inside the U.S. prison system, the brothers led quiet lives compared to their years of command. Gilberto, aging and increasingly frail, spent his time in a federal facility in North Carolina, while Miguel was held in a separate institution. Despite the fall of their empire, both remained respected figures among other inmates, symbols of an era when Colombian traffickers had dominated the world's narcotics trade. Over time, their health began to deteriorate. Gilberto, who had long suffered from heart and prostate problems, petitioned for early release on medical grounds, but his requests were denied. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, the global cocaine trade had transformed. The dismantling of the Cali and Medellín cartels did not end the flow of drugs. It merely decentralized it. New groups emerged, such as the Norte del Valle cartel, composed of former Cali operatives, and later the Mexican organizations that came to dominate the trade in the 2000s and 2010s. These newer cartels adopted many of Cali's business, like tactics, relying on logistics, corruption, and financial control rather than open warfare. The Orejuela model had outlived its creators, shaping the strategies of traffickers across Latin America. In Colombia, the legacy of the brothers remained controversial. For some, they were seen as the embodiment of corruption and greed that had infected the nation during the height of the drug wars. For others, their story was a lesson in how power could be wielded through quiet manipulation rather than violence. The collapse of their cartel had exposed deep links between the criminal world and legitimate society, ties that would continue to haunt Colombia for decades. Investigations into the 1994 election scandal resurfaced periodically, revealing the enduring influence of cartel money in political life. Throughout the 2010s, reports about the brothers occasionally emerged in the media. Gilberto was said to spend most of his days in isolation, reflecting on the empire that had once stretched across continents. Miguel, though more reserved, maintained sporadic communication with family members. In 2014 US, authorities announced that the brothers had agreed to forfeit millions of dollars in hidden assets as part of their plea agreements. It was a symbolic gesture. Most of their fortune had long been lost, seized, or hidden beyond recovery. But it marked one of the final legal chapters of their story. As years passed, time accomplished what law enforcement and rivals could not. The once powerful rulers of the Cali cartel aged into obscurity. Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela died in 2022 at the age of 83 inside a federal prison in North Carolina. His death closed a chapter that had begun decades earlier in the narrow streets of Cali. Miguel, the younger of the two, remained incarcerated, carrying the final memory of the empire they had built together. Yet the mark they left on the drug trade remained indelible. The organizational blueprint of the Cali cartel became a model studied by law enforcement agencies around the world, a system that proved how intelligence, networks, and corruption could rival any army. Their rise had shown how deeply the cocaine trade could integrate itself into legitimate structures of business and government, blurring the line between crime and legality. even as newer cartels emerged. From Mexico's Sinaloa organization to the Jalisco New Generation cartel, the lessons of the Orejuela brothers endured. The brothers' ability to operate for so long undetected had relied on three principles: control of information, control of institutions, and control of perception. They had built networks that extended into banks, customs offices, and police departments. They ensured loyalty through money, favors, and silent threats. They avoided the flamboyance and violence that had destroyed Medellín, preferring instead to manipulate the system from within. Their downfall came not through a single betrayal, but through the slow erosion of secrecy. One by one, associates turned informants, and each revelation exposed another layer of the hidden empire. The U.S. and Colombian governments, through joint operations, dismantled not only the leadership, but also the infrastructure that had allowed the cartel to function. Plan Colombia, launched in the late 1990s and early 2000s, further strengthened cooperation, targeting both production and trafficking routes. Though the program's success was mixed, it symbolized the global determination to prevent another organization from rising to Cali's level of power. For the families of the Orejuela brothers, life after the cartel was a quiet struggle between loyalty and survival. Many of their relatives faced investigations, asset seizures, and the lingering stigma of their last name. Some tried to rebuild legitimate lives, while others were drawn back into criminal networks that sought to revive fragments of the old cartel structure. Law enforcement agencies kept close watch, wary that the legacy of Cali might re-emerge under new names and faces. In the end, the fall of the Orejuela brothers stood as a defining moment in the history of the global cocaine trade. It marked the transition from centralized Colombian dominance to a decentralized network of international traffickers. The brothers' capture and extradition demonstrated that even the most sophisticated criminal empires could be dismantled when their secrecy was compromised. Yet their methods, the use of corporate fronts, financial laundering, and institutional infiltration, remained central to organized crime long after their empire's end. As the years turned, the world moved on from the headlines that had once carried their names. Colombia began to rebuild, shifting its image from the epicenter of the cocaine wars to a nation striving for peace and reform. But in the quiet corners of Cali, memories lingered. Older residents still remembered the days when elegant businessmen with impeccable suits and calm smiles had ruled the city's hidden world. Behind their success had been an empire that reached across oceans, controlling billions in trade and shaping global markets from the shadows. The story of Gilberto and Miguel Rodriguez Orejuela was one of rise, reign, and ruin. A story not of kings in the traditional sense, but of men who understood power as a system to be managed, not displayed. From humble origins to the heights of criminal sophistication, they had reshaped the global drug trade, leaving behind a legacy written not only in violence or money, but in the evolution of organized crime itself. Their empire's fall did not end the war on drugs. It merely changed its face. The structures they had built inspired new generations of traffickers who learned from their discipline and mistakes alike. For law enforcement, their capture became both a victory and a warning that the true threat often lies not in the chaos of the battlefield, but in the quiet precision of those who move unseen.